So jumping straight into the conversation, how to talk about hard history. So we're going to be navigating the questions, the answers, and the uncomfortable truths. First comes to first, what exactly is hard history? When I put this together, I didn't think about this question originally because I was like, well, everybody's hard history is a little different. But in the SIG main group the other day, someone asked, well, what's exactly hard history? And it kind of paused me for a moment. And when I was doing my pre-speech like rituals that I have before I get on camera, I stopped and added this slide because I realized maybe I do need to address what exactly is hard history. And the short answer is that's up to you. Some people have a hard time teaching things like the Holocaust and colonization. Some people have a hard time teaching the exact dates of World War II. Some people have a hard time remembering and rectifying what they were taught and then coming back and teaching their students. So what exactly is hard history is an open-ended question. It is whatever you find difficult. The three things that I'm going to share with you about learning how to teach hard history apply to whatever you think hard history is. Whatever that is for you is what hard history is. There's no one answer. So why do we find history hard to talk about? We likely grew up with a sanitized history. We likely grew up where we didn't tell little kids about certain things. We hid all of these hard facts from people. I know where I grew up in a very conservative area in the state of Kentucky, we didn't talk about a lot of things other than just kind of in passing. So there was no deep dive into any conversations. So we don't want to scare our kids or make them feel bad about things that happened before. We don't want to take away their innocence. We don't want to take away their joy at learning. We think talking about hard topics might take that away. We don't know how to address the hard parts. Sometimes it's hard to find the words exactly to say what you mean to say, what you need to say, and to convey what actually happened. We hated memorizing dates and facts. This is me. I am dyslexic and dysgraphic, and the thought of putting dates to facts, I would break out in a cold sweat. Those are often the days that I would skip class when I knew we were going to have a history day that was specifically about facts. And it usually surrounded about war facts for me because learning the specific dates of different battles was it was my arch nemesis in school in history class. Or we're worried about getting important facts wrong. A lot of times we've been taught things that aren't exactly true, and so we worry that we're going to teach that incorrectly to our kids. So history has its hard parts. American history, I teach American queer history, and this is not easy to talk about. Some of the things that have happened is horrible to talk about. That goes for all of American history. European history isn't any better, and nowhere on the globe has history been spotless. When we look at colonization and the movement of humans across and the overtaking of other societies, that's not easy to talk about. It's not easy to talk about these things. One thing that I do stress a lot is maturity appropriate doesn't mean scrubbing history of all the negatives. I talk a lot about maturity appropriate. I'll address it again in another slide here in a minute to give you more details. But basically, you teach where your kids are. And we can't scrub history of all of the negative just because we think our kid is not 100% ready for everything. So it must all be taught. What do I mean when I say all of history must be taught? We have to teach history so that we know not to do it again. But when I say all, I'm very specific in what I mean. All doesn't mean getting bogged down in the dates. You don't have to focus on memorizing what happened on June 26, 2015. That's not a date you need to remember. But remembering things like gay marriage became legal in the United States based on the Supreme Court ruling, that's the concept. So all doesn't mean getting bogged down in the dates. It doesn't mean teaching the subject inappropriately to kids. I don't mean take your 5-year-old, sit them down in front of the screen and show them Schindler's List. That's not appropriate, and that's not teaching history. Maturity appropriate will be different for every child. I said it last slide, I said it this slide, and I'm pretty sure I say it again later. Because if I can stress one thing about teaching hard history, it's going to be teaching maturity appropriate history. And maturity appropriate isn't age appropriate. Because what my 6-year-old is ready and what your 6-year-old is ready for are probably going to be very different things based on who they are as complete human beings. So I don't use the words age appropriate. My classes are broken up by age because that's the way that the platform works. But if you have a kid who's ready for a class or not ready for a class, that's what's more important. So what does all mean? All does mean not skipping parts you don't understand. Just because you don't understand it doesn't mean skip it. All does mean not whitewashing your history for your comfort. We talk a lot about this. We talk a lot about talking to people who lived through this history, who are currently living through this history. Don't take that history and make it this stripped down, what we call whitewashed version. All does mean listening to impacted voices about events. And it does mean teaching history. Those two go hand in hand. When you've listened to the impact voices, you get the accurate picture. So we talked about what all doesn't mean and what all does mean. So how do we put this all together? Like, how do we teach this history? I am not a fan of like hiding facts from people when I give these talks. I'm going to lay out exactly the top 3 strategies, and then we're going to go through them. So the first one is digging into your personal feelings about history. The second one is using materials created by the community you are talking about whenever possible. And the third one is doing your own research on the topics before you try to teach them. So when it comes to getting through teaching hard history with your kids, these top 3 strategies are going to be what you need to survive teaching this history, to do the best job you can. So if we kind of dig into these, so dig into your personal feelings. Why do you feel the way you feel about history? Do you hate history? Why? Do you love history? Equally, why? I'm sorry about coughing. Woke up with a little tickle in my throat today and it's not going away. But why do you feel the way you feel about history? The second one is very important. Figure out what inaccuracies, half-truths, and outright lies you were taught. If you went through the public school system in most states in America, you were taught inaccuracies, half-truths, and outright lies. Unpacking this information and learning where you learned wrong is so valuable to the way that you're going to teach. The example I use is who found America? Almost everyone in my generation is going to say Christopher Columbus. But that's not true. That's not even half truth, because that's just not the way it happened. So then we start going through other people and other things, and we start learning that while some of these people that we talk about, Amerigo's Vespucci, Eric the Red, which I've heard there's actually some controversy about him that I've not read up on recently, but we start talking about all these people we say found America, we tend to forget that while those are halfway true, these people did touch foot on the continents, North and South America, they didn't find America because America was already inhabited. And so we start looking at these inaccuracies and these half-truths and we go, well, okay, I see. This isn't totally inaccurate. These people did come to the New World. But we have to teach the full truth behind it. We have to teach who was here before. We have to teach what happened when these people came. We have to teach all of it. So look into your feelings on teaching tragic events. History has tragedy. History from long, long ago all the way back to colonization has tragedy. History even further back from colonization has tragedy. History today has tragedy. We can look at the Holocaust. We can look at September 11th. We can look at any number of things that have happened in the last 30 years, and there's still tragedy. So you have to learn to sit with your feelings on these tragic events. Why do you feel the way you feel about them? And what can you do to separate your feelings from the actual facts of the events? That goes into our next one. Sit with your discomfort as you educate yourself deeper. When I learn things that make me uncomfortable, I find that if I can deep dive and learn everything I can learn, I begin to feel a little more comfortable with things. The way that I was taught, for example, about slavery was wrong. Just 100%. Like I said, I grew up in Kentucky. We didn't teach good history in our public schools where I lived personally. I had to sit with my discomfort as I educated myself on the truths about the topic of slavery. It was not easy. It was not comfortable. It was not fun. There was nothing I enjoyed about the process because it involved unlearning and then relearning actual facts. So I had to sit with my feelings and I had to dig deep down to understand why I felt the way I felt. That interpersonal inspection right there of myself has made me a better person and has made my guiding, my teaching better. So dig into that, sit with that discomfort. And then remember, we teach our children accurate history to prevent it from repeating itself. When we teach inaccuracies, we don't teach what actually happened, and that's more likely to happen again. The phrase that I grew up hearing was, if we don't know history, it's bound to repeat itself. And I firmly believe that. So the second, there we go. Seek out own voices material. Own voices is a phrase that I had not heard until I actually joined the C community. And now it's something that I hear quite often. And it's something that actually I teach under. I am gay. I am LGBTQ. I teach LGBTQ history because it is my own voice. It is my own community. So seek out own voice materials. Do your research to find materials written by those affected by the historic event. If you want to teach about the Holocaust, seek out the Jewish perspective about the Holocaust. If you want to teach about slavery, seek out the Black perspective about slavery. Now, I'm not saying that all of those perspectives are going to be exactly the same. They probably aren't, because each individual person looks at the lens of history through their own body, through their own brains. But there are facts that are universal. And more often than not, materials written by those affected by the historic event, those facts are true, and they are actually factual. They are coded in the historical record. To the victor goes the spoils a lot. And so when we read history that's written by people outside of the community that was affected, they tell the story through their lens, not through what actually happened necessarily, but how they perceived it to happen. So the best teachers are those who lived through the event. I keep coming back to the Holocaust because there is a woman on TikTok, of all places, who is a Holocaust survivor that I have been following on TikTok for probably 6 months to a year now. She is on my mind a lot because she has taught me so much more than I ever knew about that time in history, because she lived through it. And so she is absolutely the best teacher. And into the next one, respect that teaching. I have a lot of like emotional reactions to things. That's just kind of the person I am. And she'll say something, I'm like, oh wait. Part of seeking own voice materials is respecting the teacher that is teaching them. And if you're going to reach out to a curriculum, ask questions of those who create the curriculum to learn more about their personal connection to what they are selling you. Again, seek out own voices first, but there are some curriculums, there are some things in history that you can't find an own voice for. So email the people who are putting out that curriculum, email the people who are putting out that package, that teacher pay teacher thing, anything like that, and ask them where they got their information, what basis are they using to teach it, and where they fit into the community that they're teaching about. That's not to say that if someone is teaching about a community that's not theirs, that they're going to be 100% wrong. That's not what I'm saying. Historians often can teach about other things because they have learned from the people who taught it. That's why it's important to ask about the source material and where they're getting their information. Do your own research. This is the third of my 3 top tips. Do your own research. Deep dive into these topics you are planning to teach. If you want to teach something and you're like, oh, I'm going to start tomorrow, you're not prepared unless you already have the historical context and the historical knowledge to teach that tomorrow. Stop and take a minute and do that deep dive. Educate yourself. We go back to educating yourself. Do your research. Read everything you can to familiarize yourself with the topic. And then self-education is important with teaching. These 2 things go hand in hand. When you are more comfortable with a topic because you have taken the time to educate yourself, the way that you teach this topic is much more of a natural flow. I teach queer history because I know queer history. It has been something that I have spent years upon years upon years researching because it was not something that was taught to me. I did not know maybe 90% of the things that I have learned by deep diving this topic. And now I feel confident enough in this topic to turn around and teach this topic to other people. Why? Because I self-educated. I took that time to take those classes, to speak with those people, to read everything I could, to reach out to everybody. You don't have to quite go to that level. You don't have to become the teacher to be able to teach this. You don't have to become the expert. Sorry, you don't have to become the expert to be able to teach this. But finding those voices and spending time reading their work, super important. Okay, so the number 1 question I get asked with anything, this was asked of me when people were messaging me about the classes I was teaching. How much do I actually teach my kid? How much is enough? And this is my answer for everything. Teach what they're asking. not what you think they're asking. Teach what they're asking. So the way this looks is you give a broad-based introduction to younger kids. I did this in my own life as I was creating the elementary curriculum or the elementary class that I'm teaching, because I have an elementary kid. So it's easy for me to kind of have that instant feedback there. So I introduced a broad topic to her. And then I presented space for her to safely ask questions. I didn't give her the historical rundown of marriage. That was one of the lessons that I worked with her on. I did not give her the historical rundown of how gay marriage or same-sex marriage became a thing. I just kind of gave her a basic overview. And then I left her space to ask questions. I am a firm believer that we learn a lot by the questions we ask. That is the way that I learn, and I firmly believe that there are a lot of people out there who learn the same way. So give them that safe space to ask those questions, and then answer the questions they're asking, not what you think they're asking. A lot of times we lose our kids when they ask a question and we go off on a tangent. Don't do that. If they say, well, what color shoes were they wearing for that dance? Don't tell them about the color hat and the jacket and the shirt and the pants and the socks and the underwear. You can say they were wearing red shoes. And then that might lead to more questions about what other parts of their outfits were, or whatever the topic is. But if you start by giving them the full rundown of the outfit, you've closed off their ability to ask a question and get an answer. A lot of kids, my own included, myself included, shut down when we ask a question and we get a tangent that may or may not actually have the question answered. And with kids, I find it easier to just answer what they're asking. So history can be difficult, but I know you can teach it accurately. I know you can teach it well. I have faith that everyone who's here can do this, can take those 3 things that we talked about and put them into action. History doesn't have to be daunting. It doesn't have to be memorization of dates, of facts, of battles, we don't have to memorize every single date. Are those dates important? Absolutely. And it's great to have a timeline you can look back on, but we don't have to memorize them. We can memorize concepts and when they happen and how they happened, and that works just as well.